this idea of this constant push of lawfare, of ideologically driven court decisions and everything else. Now, people, certainly from the right side of US politics, argue that the constant court cases being driven by the Democrats are an attempt to stymie the president's ability to carry out his job, and the fact that a lot of these injunctions that are raised are often overturned on appeal implies that they're being issued in error, and that, well, it's just sour grapes from people who couldn't win an election. Now, the article here is more to do with the court case of an individual in relation to, and how his previous legal history is being removed from consideration. Now, the idea that if you've served your time or been pardoned or whatever, that though your prior criminal history or your prior court cases, etc., shouldn't influence the current court system. I mean, it's part of the whole reason justice is meant to be blind. You're meant to consider the case on the merits of the case in front of you, and not necessarily on the history of people. It's one of those ideas where people get upset about 3 strikes laws, because there are these concerns that you're bringing in previous history to establish, well, to give somebody a life sentence ultimately in 3 strikes laws. But the thing that sort of comes up here is the gentleman Taylor Taranto was convicted under a weapons law, carrying guns in DC. Well, that's not going to be good. And apparently was near Obama's DC residence. Okay, already we're now looking at a possibly an ideologically driven issue, and had also talked about violence towards the federal government. Okay, he was arrested in June 2023, so this would be the Biden's administration, claiming that he had a detonator, etc., and that he was basically looking at various people. The issue that the article brings up, and has got everybody so upset, is that yes, he'd been president. No, he hadn't been president. He'd been present at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and had been charged charged for it, but not convicted because, well, it never made it to trial, and Trump was able to, Trump issued pardons to the people arrested, convicted, charged during that. Now, he'd been arrested in June 2023, so he'd been arrested before the pardons had come down, and has already spent close to 2 years behind bars, and hasn't been detained again since he was pardoned. He was found guilty at trial of the gun crimes and for making a false threat to use a car bomb against a federal building. Okay, that seems fairly clear-cut on what has already been stated. Fair enough. Then in a sentencing memo, the prosecutors wrote that well, actually, it was that sort of irrelevant paragraph. Here it is. So the allegation that it was Trump's fault that, okay, all right, actually it is pertinent. So the prosecutors are alleging that in their statement that because Trump had published an address online that this guy had then reposted, that it's Trump's fault by extension. Yet Trump had just merely reposted a blog article that had been already published. And then the filings included coverage of the fact that he was part of, well, he was at the US Capitol on January 6, 2021. Okay. This is a the first couple of sentences here are rather inflammatory. They build that they step, I would say they step beyond fact. They shape opinion by what they've included and what they've excluded. So the fact that January 6, 2021, thousands of people comprising a mob entered the US Capitol was true. The joint session of Congress had met to certify the results. I don't think they were scheduled to do that till later in the day, even before people entered the Capitol. He was accused of participating in the riot by entering the US Capitol. So his crime here was entering the building, a public building. After the riot returned to his home state of Washington, where he promoted conspiracy theories around the events. That, well, I mean, you could say it's useful for creating a pattern of behavior or explaining why he may then have wanted to target Obama or things like this. But given that there'd been a pardon for the people involved and the fact it had been unnecessarily politically motivated. Now, we are going to cover some of the stuff surrounding the 2021, January 6, 2021 incident, and how the media basically lied to build a narrative. And because of the media being involved being high trust media, their presentation of information was taken as fact, not opinion or lies, as it ultimately was. So, yep, okay, so it was included. Then there was an amended version of the sentencing memo issued on Wednesday. So basically they're trying to say, look, this should influence the sentencing on these 2023 crimes. Well, he's been pardoned for it. And so the prosecutors that had initially signed it were suspended from their jobs. Well, I can see why you've unnecessarily politicized, you've unnecessarily amplified the issue when you've included commentary and material that he was pardoned for. Maybe not the conspiracy theories, but he was pardoned for the actions on January 6, 2021. So if there's already been a pardon issued for it, how do you get then to apply that in asking a judge to apply certain sentencing guidelines? So there's no information there to show that such actions were pardoned. And if they were pardoned, then surely they should be struck from the record, you'd think. But the concern that a lot of people drove up was, oh no, it's political interference and that these prosecutors are being sacked because they're not falling into line, or it's ideologically based, as opposed to they've made an error. And that it's unfairly prejudicing the treatment that the defendant is going to receive. There's no no argument that his actions in 2023 don't deserve to be dealt with in some way. But to cite an incident that he's already been pardoned for isn't helping the situation at all. So, yeah, the new amended versions were done, and there were certain elements obviously removed, given that Trump had reposted public information that had already been placed out. And, well, stuff that's, I guess, not material. And so you got people complaining that prosecutors could be put on leave for accurately stating the court record in a sentencing memo. And it's just as shocking that those truthful statements have been whitewashed in a revised filing. Well, there's a former Justice Department attorney, and now founder of a system that works to represent the viewpoints of former federal prosecutors, especially those fired by the Trump administration. So, no, not an ideologically clean situation. So quite clearly, they're going to jump at shadows. And, yeah, so people say, oh, it's Orwellian that this happened. And, well, one, you're removing information that was tied to something that's already been pardoned. And two, you're removing information that alleges the source of material was the president when he was republishing something that had already been published. Now, he was part of the conduit of information. Had it been then corrected to show the original source, I'm sure that would be more accepted. But by creating it and positioning it the way it is giving a very narrow reading of what's going on, very narrow viewpoint is what's going on. And it, yeah. Okay. While we don't comment on personal decisions, we want to make it very clear we take violence and threats of violence against law enforcement. Okay, so they're pursuing the target, they're continuing to do the sentencing, they're not stopping that. Now, the whole idea of prosecutors and attorneys, district attorneys and stuff being fired, or the DOJ being reworked by various presidents. Well, that's a thing that most presidents have done. I mean, was it Bill Clinton famously fired and replaced the DAs? Basically a whole bunch of DOJ attorneys on day one of his presidency. And, I mean, Obama certainly put things through the DOJ that people look at like, that's a bit weird. And Trump, obviously, I mean, DOJ falls under the executive, so ultimately the president has control of the DOJ, in theory. I mean, clearly in practice, Trump doesn't have the power over the DOJ that some previous presidents have had. So they're seeing this as meddling, and people complaining that Trump's, reaching beyond his remit and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, if anything, they're saying hands off. What is fundamentally a corrective bit of information in a sentencing memo? People are building a mountain out of a molehill here. And it's like, it comes at a time administration officers are working to fire scores of prosecutors and roadblocks and attempts to use the DOJ against political opponents. Well, I don't need to look at the byline to sense what ideology this author, this journalist has, or their inability to remember the period 2021 to 2024 and the ridiculous amount of lawfare carried out against Trump and members of his inner circle, and that was accepted as, oh no, now he's a X times felon and things like that. And it's like, well, wait a second, you've got to step back and look at what's been created and how it's been created. And hang on, it's one thing to say, oh no, we've got a political application of the DOJ. It's like people forget what happened with the Tea Party when Obama was in office and how they were effectively crushed. And, well, all the cases brought against Trump. Yet, it's a... If it was fairly applied, I don't think people have as much concern. If it was being sort of evenly managed across different presidencies of different sides of the aisle, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. But it seems like there's this gulf in how the DOJ was handled, run, and applied by people who aren't Trump. And that, yep, okay, fair enough. You can have concerns about how he's trying to run it and manage it. But there's a clear difference in how it's being applied and managed. And it's certainly not rising to political use in that way. Prosecutors were recently pushed out of the Justice Department after failing to indict. Okay, see, this one is interesting. Letitia James, Attorney General Letitia James, New York Attorney General. So she basically sought election saying she was going to find whatever she needed to punish Trump, to prosecute Trump. And so the cases brought against him, some of which she is alleged to have engaged in behaviour exactly the same, if not more so. And the idea that you've got these prosecutors in the DOJ who are refusing to follow directions and say, look, this person needs to be investigated to find out whether or not the public claims that have been made about their actions are on a par with the court cases, with the prosecutions that they've already carried out against some people. Otherwise, you start running into, in the US, constitutional issues with, I forget the exact term for it, but basically differential, selective enforcement. And therefore, that raises questions about procedural fairness and all that sort of stuff. And people are saying, well, Trump didn't push the case for procedural fairness or judicial overreach hard enough. And then other people turn around and point and say, well, look, the times he did raise it in court, he was told to stop it and then told, oh, no, I can continue going. So, no, it's, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, was the initial investigation because of his presence at the 2021 January 6th stuff, or because of what he did in 2023? Well, clearly what he did in 2023 is enough grounds for investigation and prosecution. But it can be a little bit of a reach to say just then. I mean, certainly people who were present on January 6, 2021 have claimed that they're receiving undue attention even after they've served time or been through the judicial process, even after being pardoned, I guess, to a degree. So he did get his 21 months sentence in the end.